I had never felt more humiliated in my life. Sitting in the plush, leather VIP seat of a private jet, I was relaxed, glancing out the window at the sprawling city below. My dad's company had just finalized a huge deal, and this was supposed to be a celebration. But, as I tried to settle in, a flight attendant approached me with a look that made my stomach churn. "Excuse me, miss, but I need to ask you to vacate this seat," she said, her tone polite but firm. I blinked, wondering if I had heard her correctly. "Sorry," I replied, straightening up, a bit of disbelief in my voice. I had been seated here because it was my father's company jet, and this was the seat he always booked for me. There was no reason I should be moved. "We have a passenger who has requested your seat," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. The tension in her voice was unmistakable. "Please, it's just for a little while." I opened my mouth to protest but saw her gaze darting to a white man standing behind her, tall, well-dressed, and with an air of entitlement about him. His posture was stiff, arms crossed, and his eyes were fixed on me, as if I were the inconvenience in this scenario. It clicked, this was about him. He had asked for my seat. "Can you please just move?" The flight attendant asked again, now almost pleading. "It'll just be for a few minutes." I stood up slowly, the reality of the situation sinking in. My father had always told me to rise above, not to react to petty slights, but this was different. The sting of injustice began to settle deep within me. I knew I had no choice but to leave, but something about it made my blood boil. As I stepped out of my seat, I could hear the passenger muttering a quiet thank you, his voice dripping with indifference, as if he were doing me a favor. I moved to the back of the cabin, a cold knot of frustration tightening in my chest. As I sat down in a less than ideal spot, my mind raced. I was not someone who was easily rattled, but this felt wrong. I wasn't sure how, but I knew this wouldn't end here. I tried to push the incident to the back of my mind, focusing on the view outside the window and trying to calm my nerves. But as the minutes passed, I could feel the sting of embarrassment simmering beneath my skin. I knew that this wasn't just an unfortunate mistake, it felt intentional. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. I glanced down and saw my dad's name flashing across the screen. I couldn't help but smile a little. There was no one who could make me feel more secure than him. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady, but I couldn't help the frustration that slipped through. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo. How's everything on the plane?" "Smooth sailing?" he asked, his tone light and casual. I hesitated for a second before replying, "Well, it was, until I was asked to leave my seat for another passenger." There was a long silence on the other end. I could practically feel his mind working through the situation, calculating the best response. "Who asked you to move?" he asked, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I glanced over at the man who had taken my seat. He was sitting comfortably in the VIP area, flipping through a magazine, completely unaware of the storm that was about to come his way. "Some guy." He didn't even ask me directly, the flight attendant did. "But it's clear he was the one who made the request," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "Dad, this doesn't sit right with me." "I know it doesn't, sweetheart," he said, his voice softening. "You did the right thing by staying calm, but I won't let this slide." Before I could protest, I heard him pick up the phone and dial a number. "Let me handle this." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I sat there in silence, the weight of the moment sinking deeper into my chest. I wasn't used to feeling small, but in that moment, I did. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, but something in my gut told me this was about more than a seat on a plane. The phone rang. Then, the call connected. "Yes, this is Arthur James," my dad's voice echoed across the cabin, now laced with authority. "I'm the CEO of James Enterprises. I understand there's been a mix-up with my daughter's seat on your plane. We need to address this immediately." I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. My dad didn't let things slide, he was a force to be reckoned with. And I knew, in that moment, this issue was going to be dealt with the way it should have been from the beginning. The rest of the flight was a blur. My dad was speaking to the airline's CEO for what felt like hours, but I could barely focus on the conversation. All I could think about was what had happened, the feeling of being brushed aside, the man who had taken my seat, and the way everything had unfolded so smoothly for him while I had to settle for an uncomfortable position in the back. When the plane finally landed, the flight attendants were noticeably different. Their previous cordiality had turned into an almost apologetic demeanor. The man who had taken my seat was nowhere to be seen. As I disembarked from the plane, my phone buzzed again. It was my dad. "Meet me at the office as soon as we land," he said, his tone cold and clipped. "I need to take care of something." I didn't ask any questions. I knew better than to push him when he sounded like that. My dad had a way of dealing with things swiftly and decisively, but I had a feeling that this time, things were going to be bigger than I had anticipated. By the time I arrived at the office, the news had already spread. My dad was surrounded by a team of high-powered executives, but the way they looked at him told me everything I needed to know. He had already taken charge. "Have a seat," my dad said, his voice calm but carrying an underlying weight that only those closest to him could understand. As I sat down across from him, I could see that his expression had hardened. "The flight crew?" I asked cautiously. "The flight crew is no longer employed," he said flatly, leaning forward in his chair. "This isn't just about a seat, kid. This is about respect. The way you were treated was unacceptable, and it doesn't matter who's involved. No one gets away with that kind of behavior on my watch." I felt my chest tighten. It was one thing for my dad to handle the situation, but hearing him take such drastic measures made the reality of it hit harder. He didn't hesitate to make sure things were dealt with in the most severe way possible. I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand, signaling me to wait. I spoke to the airline's CEO personally. "This kind of situation can't happen again, and the only way to ensure that is to show that there are consequences for actions like this," he continued. "The crew's gone, and the airline will be making a public apology. It's not about them losing their jobs, it's about sending a message. No one will ever think it's okay to treat you, or anyone else, like that again." I sat back, processing his words. There was no part of me that felt joy in hearing what had happened to the crew. But there was something about it, the clarity of my dad's decisions, that made me realize just how much power he wielded. Not only in business but in protecting the people he loved. "What about the guy who took my seat?" I asked quietly. "Don't worry about him," my dad said, his voice hardening. "He's been dealt with too." The following day, the fallout from the incident became public. My dad's company wasn't just a leading corporate giant, it was a symbol of authority and influence. His actions had consequences, but they also set a standard for how he expected others to behave. And he wasn't going to let this one slide. The airline issued a public statement that morning, apologizing for the unfortunate situation involving a passenger's treatment on their flight. But it wasn't just a standard, empty apology. My dad made sure of that. He had demanded not just an apology to me, but to the entire public. The airline's CEO, the flight attendants, and the entire crew were scheduled for a televised press conference, where they would publicly acknowledge their mistake and apologize for their actions. But there was more to it than that, much more. When the crew came on stage, visibly uncomfortable, they began their statement. The flight attendant who had originally asked me to leave my seat stood at the front, flanked by the others. The CEO spoke first, but he was interrupted by the flight attendant before he could finish his scripted lines. "I just want to start by saying that what happened to the young woman on our flight was completely wrong," the flight attendant said, her voice shaking. "I acted in a way that is inexcusable, and I am deeply sorry for causing any harm. We, as a company, failed to uphold the respect that every passenger deserves." I watched the broadcast from the comfort of my home, the weight of her apology hitting me in unexpected ways. It wasn't that I felt vindicated, I didn't want her or anyone else to lose their job, but I knew that what had happened wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reminder of how much people could underestimate others based on their own biases, even in situations that should have been beyond reproach. The CEO stepped forward next, and his voice was somber, though tinged with unease. "I would like to extend my deepest apologies to Miss James and her family. What transpired on that flight is a clear violation of our company's values. We pride ourselves on ensuring that all our passengers are treated with dignity and respect. After speaking with Mr. Arthur James, I fully recognize that we failed in this regard, and I take full responsibility for allowing this incident to occur." As I watched the CEO's face, I could see the thin veneer of professionalism cracking. The man was clearly uncomfortable, and as much as I might have wanted to savor the moment, I didn't. This wasn't the way I wanted to feel vindicated. I just wanted to move past it. Then, something unexpected happened. The camera panned to a different part of the room, where the white man who had taken my seat was standing, looking noticeably out of place. His posture was stiff, his face flushed with embarrassment. He was the one who had requested I leave my seat. He had been caught up in the mess, and now it was his turn to face the consequences. "Due to the severity of his actions, we've come to an agreement with Mr. Carlson," the CEO said, addressing the audience. "Mr. Carlson has been informed that his behavior will no longer be tolerated by our company, and he has voluntarily agreed to step down from his position as a senior executive. We are taking every measure to ensure that no such event ever occurs again." The word stung. The man who had taken my seat, who had acted as though I was nothing more than an obstacle in his path, was being held accountable. And while I couldn't exactly celebrate it, I knew it was necessary. But there was something about seeing him stand there, facing the camera, that made everything feel even more surreal. The apology and public fallout were swift, but the aftermath lingered. The press coverage was relentless, and my name was in every headline, every broadcast. At first, it was strange to see my face on the front page of every news outlet, but as the days passed, I realized something: this wasn't just about what happened on that plane. This was bigger. The media wasn't just focused on the injustice I faced, they were more interested in the fact that my dad had flexed his muscles and made the airline buckle under his pressure. My father's name was known in business circles, but now the whole world knew his influence stretched far beyond the corporate realm. It was all over the news that he had personally stepped in, that he had ensured not only accountability but that the entire company was forced to answer for their actions. I had never seen him so resolute before. I wasn't used to seeing the world through the lens of power, his power. But this situation had somehow thrust me into it. I was sitting in the office the next day, reading through the endless news reports. Most of the stories were focused on the fact that the airline had let go of its entire crew, including the CEO. They had lost their jobs, their reputations shattered. The phone rang again. It was my dad. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a little softer than it had been before. "I'm fine, Dad," I said, trying to push away the unease that had settled in my chest. "Just, everything's a lot right now." "Yeah, I know," he replied. "But I want you to understand something. What happened wasn't just about you losing a seat. It was about the principle. People, especially women, especially black women, should never feel that they don't belong, not even for a second. That's the kind of thing I won't stand for." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I knew what he meant. But as much as I appreciated his resolve, something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. I don't want people to think this was just about me. I don't want to be a symbol or a headline, I said, my voice quieter now. I just want it to be over. There was a long pause before my dad responded, his tone serious but understanding. "I get it. You don't need to carry this on your shoulders. But sometimes, things happen to make a bigger point. Sometimes, people need to see that standing up for yourself, and for others, is worth it." I didn't say anything for a while, absorbing his words. He was right, of course. The entire ordeal had sent a message. But I wasn't sure I was ready for the fallout from it. I hadn't asked for any of this attention, and yet here I was, an unwilling symbol of something much bigger than a first-class seat. As I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, I realized that this moment would follow me for a long time. Whether I wanted it or not, I had been thrust into a conversation about power, respect, and the price of standing up for yourself in a world that often undervalues people like me. As the days passed, things slowly began to settle down, but the effects of the incident lingered. The media had moved on to other stories, the airline had issued its final apology, and the crew had been replaced, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. People were treating me differently now, even the ones who didn't know what had happened. I could see it in their eyes, the way they looked at me like I was someone to be respected, even feared. It wasn't a feeling I was used to. I had always been just a normal young woman in my father's world, a world that was massive, but one I had always felt a little distant from. I had my own identity, my own passions, and my own life. But after what had happened, there was a sense of power that I couldn't deny. People started coming to me with their stories. Women, especially, reached out, telling me how they'd experienced similar moments of being treated like they didn't belong, how their voices were ignored, their worth diminished. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before: this wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about a much larger issue, one that affected so many people in subtle, everyday ways. It wasn't just the woman on the plane who had been overlooked, it was every woman who'd been dismissed, every person who'd been treated like an afterthought, every voice that had been silenced by someone who thought they were more important. That was what had resonated with the public, even if they didn't fully grasp the complexities. One evening, a woman I'd never met reached out to me on social media. She sent a direct message: "You probably don't know this, but I'm a flight attendant at that airline. And I've been in situations like yours, where I've had to turn away people in first class to accommodate others. But I never realized how much power that seat could have until I saw what you did. You stood up. I've been afraid to do that, but I won't be anymore. You've shown me that it's okay to use your voice." I didn't know how to respond at first. But after a moment, I typed back, "Thank you. I didn't do it for me, I did it because it was the right thing to do. And you have that power too. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't." It was a small moment, but it felt like I had passed something on, something more significant than a seat on a plane. The following week, my dad and I had dinner at our usual spot, a quiet, upscale restaurant in the city. As we sat down, I realized he had been watching me closely, his expression unreadable. "You've been quiet lately," he said, taking a sip of his wine. I shrugged. "I've just been thinking a lot. About what happened, and everything." He nodded, leaning back in his chair. "I know this is bigger than just a seat. It always has been. You've got a chance to make a difference now. I just want you to be ready for what comes next." I looked up at him, a little surprised. "What do you mean?" "You've always been my daughter, but now people are going to see you differently. They won't just see you as Arthur James's kid. They'll see you as someone with power of your own. And that's something that can change the world if you let it." I didn't know how to respond to that. It was one thing to be powerful within my dad's world, but to carry that power into the real world was something else entirely. I wasn't sure I was ready for it. But maybe, just maybe, I was learning to be. The following months brought a wave of change I wasn't prepared for. My life, which had always been somewhat private, was now open for public scrutiny. People started recognizing me in the street, asking for my opinion, even inviting me to speak at conferences or write op-eds about what had happened. To be honest, it all felt overwhelming. I wasn't someone who was comfortable in the spotlight. I never had been. I didn't seek out attention. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. I had been thrust into a conversation that was bigger than any one person. It wasn't just about a seat on an airplane, it was about equality, respect, and dignity, things that I had taken for granted until that moment. I began to see the impact of my actions in ways I hadn't expected. Women from all walks of life reached out to me, sharing their stories of injustice, of feeling small and unheard. It was humbling, and it made me realize that I could use the attention I was receiving to amplify their voices, too. One afternoon, I sat down with a group of women at a leadership conference. The room was filled with powerful, accomplished figures, each one with a story to tell. As I listened to them speak, something clicked inside me. The lesson I had learned from my father, about power and influence, wasn't just about money or connections. It was about using your platform to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The CEO of a major corporation was sitting across from me when she leaned in, speaking in a low voice. "You've got something that most of us don't," she said. "You've got the kind of power that comes from being underestimated, from being forced to prove yourself. You have the ability to shake things up and make real change. But it comes at a cost." I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "People will try to bring you down when they realize how much power you truly have," she said. "They'll try to make you small again. Don't let them." Her words stayed with me long after the event ended. I knew she was right. This wasn't just about standing up for myself anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. Back at the office the next day, I was going over some emails when my dad's assistant came in with a file marked confidential. She placed it on my desk, her expression a little too serious for a casual visit. "Your father wanted you to look over this," she said, then left the room without another word. I opened the file. Inside was a series of emails detailing an ongoing issue with another company we were considering a partnership with. It didn't take long for me to realize that the issue wasn't just business, it was personal. One of the key figures in this deal was someone I had crossed paths with before. A man who had, in subtle ways, belittled my contributions in the past. Someone who thought I was just a figurehead in my father's world. I felt my pulse quicken. It was time to confront this. It was time to use the power my father had always given me, not just to protect myself, but to demand the respect I knew I deserved. I walked into the boardroom the next morning with a purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. The large conference table stretched in front of me, lined with executives, including the man I had been dreading to face, Victor Carlyle. He was the one who'd always underestimated me, always treated me as though I was just a piece of my father's empire rather than a key player in my own right. Now, I had the chance to make sure he understood who I really was. As I entered, the room quieted. Every eye was on me, some out of respect, some out of curiosity. I could feel the weight of their gazes, but it was Victor who looked the most uncomfortable. He had no idea what was coming. I took my seat at the head of the table, meeting Victor's eyes without blinking. He shifted in his chair, clearly uneasy, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. His arrogant demeanor hadn't changed. He still thought he could dismiss me with a look, as if I were a child who had no real stake in this world. "I'm glad you could join us, Miss James," Victor said, his voice smooth but laced with an underlying mockery. "I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the deal." I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone even but firm. "I'm here to make one thing very clear, Victor," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "I don't work for my father. I work for this company, just like you. And if you think for one second that you can continue treating me as if I'm some naive little girl playing dress-up in a business world that doesn't belong to me, you're very wrong." The room fell into a heavy silence. Victor's eyes widened, and I could see his smirk falter, just for a second. But he quickly recovered, crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair. "Well," he said, attempting to regain control, "let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm sure we can come to an understanding." "I was merely pointing out." "Don't," I interrupted. "You were belittling me. You've done it before. Every time I've had to sit in meetings with you, you've dismissed my ideas, undermined my decisions, and made me feel like I was just here to fill a seat." I let the words hang in the air, watching as his face reddened with discomfort. I'm done with that. If we're going to move forward with this deal, you will treat me with the respect I've earned. You will stop pretending that I'm here because of my father and recognize that I am here because I'm capable. There was a moment of quiet tension before one of the other executives spoke up, breaking the silence. Victor, I think we all need to take a step back and really consider Miss James's point. We're not here to undermine anyone. We're here to make this deal work. Victor's eyes flicked toward the executive, but he didn't respond right away. The room was watching, waiting for him to make his move. He was cornered, and he knew it. Finally, he cleared his throat and nodded, albeit begrudgingly. All right, Miss James. I understand. Let's move forward. But it wasn't just the words that mattered. It was the way he said them, defeated, unwilling, and fully aware that his power in this room had just been stripped away. I hadn't just won a seat at the table, I had claimed the power to lead and make decisions for myself. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The aftermath of that meeting was quieter than I expected. For days, the atmosphere in the office had shifted. There was a subtle change in the way people treated me, more respect, more acknowledgement. And, in some cases, a new level of fear. I wasn't sure if it was the power of the moment, or if people were genuinely beginning to see me as a leader in my own right, but either way, things were different. Victor Carlyle, the man who had once thought so little of me, began to change his tune. He started deferring to me more often in meetings, seeking my opinion before moving forward with decisions. It wasn't just about respecting me anymore, it was about recognizing that I had a voice that mattered in shaping the direction of this company. But as much as I began to embrace my newfound authority, there was still a lingering unease in the back of my mind. This power came at a price. It came with expectations, with challenges that I hadn't fully prepared for. And sometimes, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something that could either elevate me or bring me crashing down. One afternoon, I sat in my office staring at the framed photo of my father on the wall, a reminder of the legacy I was supposed to carry forward. He had always taught me that power wasn't just about what you had, it was about how you used it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this journey wasn't just about proving myself to others. It was about proving something to myself. The phone rang again. My dad's assistant. Miss James, your father would like to speak with you. I took a deep breath, straightened up, and picked up the receiver. Dad? Hey, kiddo. You good? His voice was calm, but I could hear the pride in his tone. I'm good, Dad. Just thinking. He chuckled softly. About the meeting, huh? Yeah, I said, my voice steady. About everything, really. You've handled it well, he said. I'm proud of you. But I want you to remember something. This world, this life we're in, it's not just about having power. It's about how you use it. You've got the opportunity now to make a real difference. But don't lose sight of what matters most. I looked out the window, watching as the city's skyline stretched before me. I won't, Dad. I promise. You've earned your place at that table, he said, his voice firm but full of warmth. But never forget that your real power is in knowing when to listen, when to speak, and when to stand your ground. And don't let anyone make you think you're less than you are. The weight of his words settled in my chest. It wasn't just about the seat on the plane anymore. It was about what I did with the power I had, how I used it to create change, to break down barriers, and to stand up for the things that mattered. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt. But I had the strength to navigate it. I had the power to shape my own destiny. And I would never again let anyone make me feel small.